Welcome to VOLIFE, brought to you by Gravy for the Brain Oceania. And this is the interview where I talk to people who are big in the voiceover industry. We talk to voice artists, we talk to agents, all kinds of people. Today is one of those agents or agencies. I'm very pleased to present Luke Downs, who's the Managing Director of RMK Voices in Australia. G'day, Luke.
G'day, Toby.
How you doing?
Yeah, good. How are you?
Yeah, pretty well, thank you. Pretty well. Now, I want to start just by setting the scene. I'm obviously located in New Zealand here, and I've been a voiceover for a number of years. And I've kind of dipped my toe into the Australian industry because it's right there, just across the Tasman.
Mm-hmm.
But I've found that, like, when I have, it's been sort of. I want to have this chat because I wanted to find out more about the Australian voice industry because it seems to be a sort of a tougher nut to crack than possibly the US or sort of the British markets, etc.
That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So before we get into it, though, just your kind of history in the voice acting world. I understand that you were kind of in full immersion from quite a young age. Is that right? You kind of lived and breathed it.
Yeah. Well, it's my father was a voiceover, so I did. I grew up with, I guess, a fairly good understanding of the voiceover industry from a young age. So my dad was one of the top voices in Australia, certainly through the 80s. And it was about the end of, towards the end of the 80s, around 88, I think it was, that he bought the agency from the person who started it, who was Ron Scott. So he kind of made a shift from being voiceover to agent and continued actually doing both. So right up until quite recently, actually, he's still been doing the odd voiceover. And I guess, and so I started 20 odd years ago, about 21, 22 years ago. It was a time when my father was looking at retiring, getting out of voiceovers. Something that I was sort of over in London at the time, doing some sales jobs over there, and seemed like a great opportunity. And so that's when I came on board. Just before in 1999.
Fantastic, yeah. And it's interesting, actually, just reading some of your bio from the RMK website, that we actually have quite a shared history in that I think you were a cart boy at a local radio station right at the same time I was a cart boy.
When they used to have cart boys.
Exactly. Like, someone used to have to take the national ads and they had to take it off a news feed, record it onto reel-to-reel tape, and then load it onto individual carts. And I think it was actually a really good time in the industry to cut your teeth because you understood the old form of the industry and tape and the sort of, linear editing systems. And it stood you in good stead for when non-linear came about, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it was an interesting time because it was, and going from that analog to digital, a lot of people really struggled with it. I guess I was quite lucky that happened when I was young. But yeah, I feel like an absolute dinosaur when I talk to people, particularly some of our younger audio engineers, and tell them about the old reel-to-reel and, splicing with a scalpel and marking with a Chinograph pencil. But it wasn't that long ago.
Absolutely. It wasn't. It doesn't feel like that long ago, does it? And
and yet it's eons by way of how far technology's come.
Yeah, and it's amazing to think, like, if we had that same technology, how much the sort of throughput of ads and the productivity would be reduced because it did take so much more time.
And this is where studios used to, spend a lot of their time and make a lot of their money was just doing dubs. I mean, every one of those ads actually had to be put onto a reel and sent around the country to all the radio stations who would run.
Exactly. Yeah. Gosh, it is very interesting, isn't it? So a lot of the agents that I know have come from the kind of voiceover side of the they've been a voiceover and then they've bought or come into an agency and then managed. Most of them stopped doing voiceover at that point. Do you think that's a wise thing to do? Do you still do voiceovers, or do you sort of?
Yeah, I've never done voiceovers. I did as a kid. And I did and after, in addition to being a cart boy, I also worked as we call it a Black Thunder pilot. here. They're driving the promotional cars for a radio station.
They were called
So
Black
I
Thunders,
do.
where I grew up as well. And
Oh yeah,
yeah.
okay. I think most radio stations have some sort of street vehicle named a Thunder or a Lightning or. So anyway, so that was about my extent of using my voice in a I guess that sort of a capacity. Voiceovers. I did when I was at the radio station. They tried to get me to do a couple of voiceovers, and I was terrible. And I guess that was something that I think might have held me in good stead as an agent, is that I could recognize, talent, and I can recognize a lack of talent. And certainly in terms of voiceovers, I'm in the latter category.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but you do make a great agent, I'm told. So that's
oh, thank you. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So, given that you've had 20 years as the head of this ship and immersed in the Australian voiceover industry, what would you say is the current state of the voiceover industry in Australia? Is it sort of fixed? Is it moving? What's going on?
Yeah, look, it's I think it's generally pretty healthy. We've got quite a strong I guess in the top area, I guess the top part of town, like where most of the, let's call it, premium sort of work would go. There's a lot of solidarity. So that, we are lucky to have a union. That is, voiceovers are pretty well represented in that union. And most of the top voices would be a member of that union. So, and that helps us with achieving, fair and reasonable rates and conditions for voiceovers. So what we find is there's a few agents in Australia, specifically voiceover agents, but we generally get along pretty well, and we don't find that we have to compete on price too much. So it's that's been helpful in creating having a bit of longevity in this business. There is obviously the cheaper end of town where there's endless amounts of voiceover sites out there where people can get cheap work done, but we don't really find that we have to compete. Well, we can't. No one can compete in that area. But generally, our clients have a respect for the people that we manage, and a respect for the process, and I think sort of don't mind paying reasonable fees to get a great result.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that is the kind of the win-win which everyone wants to strive towards and maintain. Really, is the fact that in order to keep yourself as an artist and keep yourself available artistically for that kind of thing, you do need to charge a certain amount, which is, which kind of holds the space for you to develop your art, for example. And by premium sort of end, I assume you're talking about sort of broadcast agency, advertising agencies, etc., which have always traditionally held that kind of upper echelon of fees, etc. Have you seen an expansion in the not sort of super cheap, sort of south of $200 kind of voiceovers, but like a kind of a mid tier, which is kind of it's going to be low exposure and quite sort of high volume stuff? Do you engage in that kind of work?
Yeah, look, there's it's constantly changing, as you know. There are areas that used to be big earners for us and big earners for many of our artists that have almost completely disappeared. And I mean, the area of promos, for example, TV promos, some channels used to use voices 3 or 4 times a week, and those same channels are maybe using them once or twice a month now. So there's been changes in that. Obviously there's a lot more applications now for voiceovers. When we look at social media and whatnot, which I guess has taken a lot of the traditional TV and radio media, we've had to make some adjustments on our rates to account for the limited exposure, or it might be very targeted, for example. So they might do, 15 tracks to target around one, just within one state. Now that would previously that would have just been, one fee for a, one state track. But now there's 50, different end tags for the different dealers or whatever it might be. So, we've made adjustments to recognise that change in our rates. I think as long as you're adapting and evolving as the media or the landscape changes, then I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say overall that VO work is increasing, maintaining the same place, or is declining in certain areas? I mean, overall,
what areas? Sorry,
overall. So in all categories.
Look, there's content's been a good area of business for us. So where we've noticed some changes, for example, there's been a dip in promos. That's kind of been compensated by an increase in content. So you think about all the companies that are out there that have pretty much anyone who's got a website really should have some sort of video component, whether it's a behind the scenes at the factory or whether it's some sort of explainer videos. Content has become so easy to create, and I think a lot of customers and your audience go in search of finding out more if they're interested in your product or they're interested in your business. They want to find out more, and it's pretty easy to create content. And there, of course, brings opportunities for voiceovers.
Absolutely. One of the things I've really struggled with in terms of pricing and coming up with rates, and a lot of voiceovers, is one of the hardest areas, when they've done a few years in the industry and they're looking at, getting really serious with their career, is trying to set their own rates if they're self-agenting. And one of the things I've really struggled with is when, for example, if you do a 90-second video for like a lawyer in the local village, for example, who's got, a small number of clients and it's an About Us video or something. That is the same work as doing, a job for Facebook, for example. Like It's the same length of video, it'll probably take, but the different amounts of expertise you need for those two things are quite a different animal. And there's going to be a lot of more value extracted from the Facebook end than there is from the local lawyer down in the village. So how do you sort of differentiate fees between sort of like big clients and small clients? Do you ever make sort of exceptions on that kind of basis where it is low usage or low value?
Yeah, look, it's a tough one, and it's something that comes up quite a lot. I believe in the UK and in some of the US work, certainly the union work, they would have either a buyout or some sort of residual payment where it's actually determined by the exposure, where it's going to be played, how often it's going to be played, and there's a fee that's created accordingly. We have a kind of a broader rate card in Australia, which again is based on the MEAA, the equity rate card. So we determine usage or rates by how long it's going to be used, and where it's going to be used, and I guess how many tracks you might be creating. And we make a distinction between one state or more than one state, up to 3 months, up to 6 months, up to 12 months, and then it's per media, so TV, online, radio, cinema. We still then have the same problem of, Bob's Butchers in Petersham that might run an ad on a local radio station, 3 times, is paying the same that Commonwealth Bank or a Toyota might be paying to run that ad 15 times a day for 3 months. And it's, I don't know if there's sort of wiggle room as such. I mean, if there was going to be a lot of like high quantity of tracks, you might be able to you might come up with some sort of deal. But what we do is we just say, look, it's an average rate card. There's better value, if you're going to be, a high exposure ad, and it's not as good a value if it's going to be used one-off. But I guess short of having some sort of residual system, you try to create something that's fair and not too complicated.
Yeah, exactly. And the complexity thing is something I've really struggled with, because like I currently use a system which is based on like the value that's getting extracted from from the work that I do, for example. So like, and I'll have like it's very hard to tell how, like, to really find a way to prove how big a company is. And I do it by like number of offices generally. So if they've only got one office, they're a startup and it's kind of a small thing. If they've got offices throughout one country, then that's like a national brand. And if they've got offices in multiple countries, then suddenly you're an international brand and you can afford to pay, top dollar.
That's a good way of doing it.
Which is a quick way to differentiate it, because you can just go to their website and see how many offices they've got, and then that's so that's the kind of the only fair way I've found to sort of differentiate between those two things. The tricky thing also with usage, because we're in this kind of like post-broadcast era, where it used to be that if it's on national broadcast, that's your top rate because everyone's seeing it, but now it's like you put they want it on the web straight away, so have broadcast plus web, but a lot of things are going straight to web now. So there'll just be a paid there'll be paid placement on YouTube, and they're going to the entire world theoretically. So how has your company sort of pivoted to account for the fact that when it's on the web, it's basically everywhere and you can't really stop playing it? Like it exists on the web from then on.
Yeah, look, it's again, it's sort of just you have to sort of look at it as I guess an average. There'll always be some tracks that have high exposure, and you've charged the same fee as tracks that have a lower exposure. But I think one of the challenges that we faced when we were, and we kind of designed the rate card in consultation with voice artists, with the union, and with the Communications Council, which is sort of the governing body for advertising agencies. So we generally sort of nut out these rates, and one of the big challenges was with internet usage. And when many years ago, when sort of internet was sort of new, we would just charge if something went on the internet, it was either if it's a commercial, you kind of go 5 times the national fee, and if it was a narration, you double it. So you just go, well, double for worldwide usage. But it's actually very targeted now. So when you see an ad on Facebook, or you're looking at a news page, and before the story comes up, an ad comes on, they actually sort of geolocate those to very specific regions. So it's actually it's often a much smaller audience that is actually your material is being exposed to than it would have been on a traditional sort of TV media. But we still base online usage, on a I guess a traditional sort of TV track. But we will look at it if it's only going to be played in a specific region, and they can geolock that so that they will know that it's only in that area. And then we can say, well, we know it's only going to go to so many people, and then we can take that into consideration when we're quoting.
Absolutely. And all of your, and incidentally, it's a great rate card you've got on the RMK site, and a good sort of reference point for people. It was also really heartening for me, because I've sort of worked on my rate card, as I say, for the last sort of 3 years to try and get it right, and it came out almost exactly the same as your rates. Like, we both evolved completely in isolation. Then when I compared them, it was like, wow, we're actually charging pretty much the same, which is a good indication that like that's what the market will bear, and that's what is a fair price, and people are prepared to pay. So that was very heartening for me.
Well, that's good. Yeah. And look, that's something that we, whenever there's someone, looking for representation and we can't help them, or they come to us and look, I've got this job, with a so-and-so, I don't know what to charge. We'll sort of direct them to our rate card, and we don't mind our rate card being used. In fact, it's, it's been borrowed by quite a few people, including other agencies, and that's fine because I like you said, I think it's a fair rate card.
Yeah.
The commercial side is actually endorsed by the union, and then the non-commercial rates are pretty much in line with what most of the top professional agencies charge.
Yeah, fantastic. So, I mean, I said at the outset that one of the things I found sort of difficult when I was trying to sort of study the Australian market was that basically you have to live near a studio in Australia. There isn't this kind of, as we've seen in especially the UK and America and other places around the world, voiceovers have an agent, but they also have a home studio, and they can do tracks from there. And you pretty much, am I right in the fact that you pretty much don't accept voices that don't live in Sydney or Melbourne, sort of near a studio?
Yeah, look, it's a few of our artists, started in Sydney and then have moved, into regional areas or internationally, and we'll continue to manage them. Up until a year ago, let's say pre-COVID, that was absolutely the preferred method of recording anything, was to go to a professional studio. And it's quite an important part of, I guess, the whole production and creative process. The studios do more than just, edit and, create the sound. They're often offering direction advice. They're working in with the creatives and sort of helping to sort of translate the message from the creative to the voice, and helping the voice get the best, get the best out of the voice as well. So it's always been a really nice, respectful sort of relationship that we have between agencies, ad agencies, talent agencies, and studios. And that was reflected in the fact that, most work would, you just couldn't really do it from home, or it wasn't, just wasn't in demand. Now that has changed, by necessity, through this, through the last year, where people, have set up home studio. I mean, you almost have to have a home studio now.
Yeah.
And they will still generally connect up with a professional sound studio using Source Connect or, a phone link up or whatever it might be. But I guess, look, it's, you probably know this as well. You can fire out a million arrows to all these clients around the world, but you're one of thousands of people sending out that probably a very similar message. When you're actually on the ground and you actually go and meet people, and I'm sure you probably would experience when you're in a professional studio. Do you think that they get a better product out of you when you're not having to worry about the technical side?
I definitely think there is. It's slightly different. I feel like Source Connect has closed the gap a little bit between that in terms of because I mean, always recording on your own, self-directing when you give 3 takes and you're guessing about the interpretation of the script and you're maybe doing a bit of direction for your email. It's never the same as being in the moment and getting that good feedback. But I think Source Connect does close that in terms of they can give you direct feedback straight away, even over Zoom or something. They can give you direct feedback.
That's fair.
But I know that before COVID, when I had a London agent for a while, and they said clients love your voice, but they want to be in the studio. They just want to shake your hand, look you in the eye. You know? And that's the bridge I think that COVID has kind of just pushed us over, is the fact that I can still direct over this thing. So, and I think that's why it has taken off, and it will retain even when everyone's COVID free. I feel like it's become a bit more convenient.
That's an interesting point you make too, because in London, from what I understand pre-COVID, at least in the top area of the business, almost no one had home studios or work from home studios.
Yeah.
So we represent a guy who's got an agent in London, and he had a very good home studio and was able to, when COVID hit, his work in the UK increased dramatically because everyone was sort of playing catch up in building their home studios, working out how to use the software, etc.
The other big thing about having a home studio is the fact that there's this whole new thing, especially America, with custom demos. So every job that goes through, 100 voice artists jump into a booth and give their best read, and then the clients can compare all of the different takes, apples with apples, as it were. I understand you're still pretty much casting from demos, is that right? And you have fees for?
Yeah, look. I guess the first layer of the casting process, absolutely, is from an artist demo. Most of our artists would have categorized demos. So they would have, in addition to their main compilation demo, it might be a voice acting demo, a natural demo, a promos demo, characters or whatever. So it does provide something a little bit more, specific than just the, here's me doing everything. So that's the first step. It might be, there's a lot of people that specialize in voice casting here as well, not just us within the agency, but also a lot of the creatives will be experts in the voices that are available and offer suggestions in that area, and certainly the sound studios as well. So they might sort of say, look, have a listen. When the brief first comes along, they'll say, have a listen to these guys, and they'll go to the demos, they'll play their compilations or their specific demo, and then they might create a short list. Now, from that short list, you probably would then, if it's a decent campaign, you'd probably get 2 or 3 voices to go in and test for that. But we, and I guess it's, thankful for that strength of the industry, we do get paid for that. It'll be a submission fee, which just covers the artist's time. And then from that, the client can make a pretty informed judgment as to what they want. And in that as well, of course, when you're doing a demo or a submission and you're getting paid for it, you're also getting direction from the client. Yes. So, and you touched on this before, when you don't have that, when you're sort of going blind and you've just got a script and a bit of a brief, you think it should sound like this. It's often wrong. And that's, I guess, that's a real key for successful voices. It's not how you think it should sound. It's your ability to interpret, I guess, the message as to how the client thinks it should sound.
Yeah, absolutely. And that feedback is so useful, and that's something that it's very hard for voiceover starting out to get. Like, in order to get better, you kind of need to be told like what not to do, or to kind of experiment with your range and see how, to go in different directions and see how,
and work with different people and get that input from all these different people. In fact, we one of the downsides with the home studios, and I think particularly a lot of very, very keen voices, keen to sort of hone their craft, will often develop very bad habits when they're self-directing. They're listening to the sound of their voice and they want to make it deep and rich, and they often lose what the message in the script is because they're listening too closely to their voice. And as you probably know, clients these days want real voices. They want relatable voices. So quite often, you end up with these, voices that have been practicing and working on their voice and their crafts and their delivery, have often sort of gone too far in the wrong direction, where there's actually not that much demand.
Yeah, gone down a rabbit hole. Trying to emulate. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Going back to the like home studios and custom demos, I imagine it's quite tricky. Like if you were to roll out the system where people, if a client wanted to have a demo reading of a script, not kind of giving advantage to those voiceovers that had home studios versus those that didn't. It's almost like everyone would have to have a home studio for you to start offering that, so that because if a client gets a couple of generic demos and then a custom demo of their script, they're more likely to like the one with the script because they're like, oh, well, those are my words. Like I'm hearing my words back at me. And they don't have to use their imagination to make that leap. So do you think it's something you'll consider in the future in terms of like home demos if enough people get on board with that kind of thing? Like, is it something you see that in the future you will go towards, or are you going to hold out?
Look, if it's, like I said, if it's a big job or if it's a big campaign, we'll always do, demos. And if that's what the client wants. Quite often scripts are written with a voiceover already in mind. There's not a big casting process. So really, at the moment where we do most of the time receive a fee for those demos. So it's probably not really in our interest to start giving that away for nothing. And I'm not sure how much value that gives to the client anyway. I mean, yes, I can take your point about receiving their actual script and being able to go, hey, we've got all these people and we can actually go, this is, very specifically who sounds great reading our script. But quite often by listening to artist demos, you might actually hear something on a demo that you had not considered for your script, or you might go, oh, actually, what you did on the read for Commonwealth Bank, that's the voice that I want. So I think can actually help in the whole process when clients are casting off demos. And I think the other thing that certainly when I've spoken to clients who have done that big, let's call it a cattle call, where they send out the script and they get, hundreds of responses. I mean, it's, that would be a pretty challenging task to trawl through all of those and find your favorites. And I think particularly when you're working off some of those, let's discount voices websites, you've got to trawl through a lot of rough before you find the diamonds, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's gotten quite crazy in America. I know a lot of my agents over there, when I get scripts, they say, you have to read, it's maybe probably 60 seconds worth of copy. They're like, you have to read the whole script and you have to read it 3 times in these 3 different styles. And then they often submit that to the production company. The production company will take their favorite, people. They'll actually assemble the entire ad, including visuals, and then they'll present those to the client. So they're basically like, the client's just picking basically the finished ad. And then they'll...
And the voiceover hasn't received a fee.
Well, that's the thing, exactly. So it is generating a huge amount of unpaid work over there in the States for, but I guess people who are full-time voiceover artists, they're in the studio all day just doing these kind of, random ads.
Are they then compensated for the fact that when they do land the ad or an ad, that it's at least higher paying?
Oh, absolutely. This is for things that are north of like $3,000 US. This is sort of TV commercial territory or SAG, SAG contract. So it is definitely like, it is, when you look at the sort of the auditioning for little jobs versus big jobs, it is worth putting the extra effort into those big jobs because you land one of those and it's kind of paid for quite a few.
Because you wouldn't be doing that for I guess a smaller fee. No. I mean, you'd hate to be putting through all those auditions and, for that. I mean, what would you think is a sort of a hit rate for a successful voice? Would it be 1 in 10 that they'd get, or would it be 1 in 50?
Through sort of average jobs, I would be booking at about a 1 in 10, 1 in 12 rate of where I've supplied a custom audition. and but 1 in 20 is more like the average kind of, if you're in your first couple of years, and if you're a real beginner, it's probably more like 1 in 100, and price might be more relevant in terms of the clients are on that end of the spectrum where they just want someone to fill the void. And of course, now we've got this. We might talk about this later, but we've got this whole added dimension of like speech allo and AI synthesized voices, which are lower than that bottom end. But I mean, you can't really call them voices because they just don't sound like human voices. Well, not yet.
No,
anyway.
it's I think something that sends fear into the minds of many a voice artists. The idea that you can just computer generate a read, but I think for certainly the area of the marketplace that we work in, I mean, there's just so much beyond just reading out words that a voiceover brings, and just even something timing, just where they pause, where the inflection goes. I can't see how a computer could ever take that job away from someone.
Yeah, I mean, my mind can stretch where a computer could do it, but it's hard enough giving from a human giving direction to another human and them getting it right, let alone someone trying to program a computer to do that. That's going to be the area. Is like, how do you actually tell the computer? I just want a bit more sparkle. I want this to read to be a bit more orange. Abstract, abstract directions, which are always my sort of favorite. Cool. So we briefly touched on sort of online voiceover sites. America sort of has led the world in the, not exactly the race to the bottom, but the fragmentation of the voiceover industry, due to demands, I guess, like the fact that there are so many more just like low budget web videos that some of which will never be seen. There seems to be so much work around that. And, players like voices.com, Voice123, Bidalgo, Mandy, there's all kinds of different tiers in the industry. But there's nothing that seems to be in the Oceania sort of space, or England to be fair too. So like the kind of the Europeans are still kind of in the old model, but America definitely seems to be setting this kind of standard where people in, not necessarily agents, although agencies are using it in the States to cast big commercials, but the bulk of the work seems to be in that kind of $200 to $500 space, like conference openers and stuff like that. Do you see that market coming over here at all, like a pay-to-play?
It's been trying to, I guess, gain traction here for at least 15 years. I mean, I've had discussions going back to almost when I first started with various people looking to launch these sorts of offerings to the Australian marketplace. But obviously, you mentioned it before, a sort of race to the bottom. I've kind of closely followed what's going on in the American landscape, and all of these pay-to-play sites started off in the same way, where you're free to join, list on our website, and then clients can just go, doesn't matter what agency you're with, they can go to one place and here's all these professional voices and you can select. So that in the beginning, that's how simple it was being sold as, just like a directory site. And then what happens is, it'd be great if you would send us a sample of you reading this ad. So you start pitching for the job. The next step is, now what rate are you going to charge us for that? And then you end up with this sort of, auction system where people are submitting, a free of charge demo and then saying, and I'll do it for this much. And generally, if it's, and particularly if it's not being managed by an agent, which I don't imagine much of it is, they're probably not asking the right questions. Where is this going to be used? How long is it going to be used for? How many tracks are you going to create? So you end up, it's had devastating effects in the American industry, the rise and popularity of these sites. So we've been quite fortunate in Australia that when these sites have come into our landscape, that we've recognised what's happened in other industries and said, well, it's not good. It's not sustainable. I mean, it might be sustainable in a market like America because it's, so much bigger than Australia. But you can't have in a small country like Australia or New Zealand, you can't be offering free demos and cheap rates for a sustainable industry. I mean, what you would end up with is, every voice I imagine would have to have a second job. You wouldn't be able to have a sustainable industry if you've got sites like they've got in the States in our market being used.
I mean, on the kind of like the free demos front, I mean, I as a full-time voiceover artist, I'm constantly looking for work and auditioning for work. So I probably do about 10 to 20 auditions per day for various things on an average day.
Wow.
And I mean, I don't mind doing that because, like, I love the auditioning process. Like, I think to be a voiceover artist, you have to love auditioning. Like, you have to see it as your chance to get better every time you do one, your chance to try out new stuff and see if you're any good on it, and exercise your self-direction.
Of those tests, the demos that you're doing, how much of that is for the markets outside of New Zealand?
Almost all of it, 90%. 95%.
So you're talking US and UK
and British,
mostly.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Or people from these countries who are posting on those foreign sites, but it is mostly from America and possibly the Middle East, a little bit of it, but mostly Europe and America. Okay. My question was going to be, I'm not sure how many voices you have on your market, your books, and I wondered how many of those are full-time professional voiceovers, like as in they sit around waiting for the call. And like, would they mind doing demos from home? Would they enjoy doing demos from their home, or that kind of thing? Like, is it that much of a strain on voice artists to do custom demos? Aside from the money thing.
I think there's we have about 200 voices between Sydney and Melbourne, which are our main markets. Of those, probably 50% would be full-time freelance voiceover artists. They've probably got time to do the free tests. But like you're saying, it's if that sort of area is $200 to $500, and you're doing 10 tests, it's quite an amount of work for what might be quite a small return. And particularly, you would hate to be investing your time in the free stuff at the expense of what could be time with a paying client. So look, it might go that way. But again, our rates are governed by a union here, and the union stipulates that there's a fee for demos, and that's also been endorsed by the Communications Council, which is the governing body for ad agencies. So I think everyone kind of thinks that voices should be paid for their time. There are obviously reasons why you might do tests if they're looking for a new voice for a major brand or a major campaign, or a new channel. Sure, free, it makes sense to do free tests for that. But just for a radio ad or a TV ad or a content piece, I think you can get a pretty good handle on the suitability of a voice by listening to their demo. And most of the time, we don't do many redos where the casting wasn't right. So I think most of the time it's a successful process.
Yeah, and it's a collaboration between you knowing your voices and knowing what's right for the project as well, I imagine. That's where you add your value, right? As well as making it easy for the client. So no, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. We're fast running out of time. I'm enjoying this conversation so much. It's very stimulating. But I'm sure my viewers, or a large segment, for example, on Gravy for the Brain, which is an education platform for people who want to learn more about being a voiceover artist and then progress their skills as a sort of a beginner or intermediate voiceover artist, is a lot of people see that agents are kind of a gatekeeper to the industry. It's like, if you haven't got an agent, then you don't get that kind of work. You won't be in the Telstra ad, and you won't be in the the big channel level stuff. But it seems very difficult to actually make that first step, because agents say, well, what have you done? And you're like, well, I haven't done anything because I haven't got an agent. And there's this kind of chicken and egg scenario, which is
22,
exactly, yeah. And it's one of the reasons I started my sort of foray into the voice education sphere, because I got so many people saying exactly that. And it was like, well, let's make this kind of like no man's land in the middle, where you do ads and it's not real, but at least you've got something on tape and you've learned a bit about yourself. What's your best advice for aspiring voiceovers to try and gain experience? Like to bridge that no man's land.
Yeah, look, it's tenacity, isn't it? I mean, there's most of the almost every voice that we represent, we probably said no to them several times over several years before we were able to take them on. And it's there's a range of criteria that that we have to consider before we take on a new voice. But certainly, having experience, some sort of profile is, almost vital. So it is very hard for people, new starting out in the business. I think acting courses always add to a voice's skill set. I think obviously nothing happens before you've got some sort of example of your work, and that is normally a demo. So once you get that demo, it's just you can shop it around to agents. You might find yourself with an agent if you're very good and a little bit lucky and happen to have good timing. But then there's a lot of studios and there's a lot of radio stations that like to discover people. They're very passionate about what they do. And if you're presenting something that's interesting and something that's new, they'll generally listen to it. And then it's that fine line between being persistent and being a nuisance. But just coming up, and I think you always need an angle. You always need a reason to contact someone. It's not just, have you listened to my demo yet? But it might be, I guess do your homework. If there is a radio station, radio stations are great because they've got a high demand of voices. And they're generally very passionate about their crafts, and they're on the lookout for new voices. So if you are starting out, hit up all the local radio stations. The creatives, the copywriters, the programming, production, and look at ways to get your demo heard. And look at ways, it might be, look, I'd love the opportunity to come in there, and what about, hey, I won't charge you if you don't use it, So looking for ways that you can get that foot in the door, that you can build up a bit of experience and start establishing some solid relationships. But be prepared for it to take years. It will take years. And along that time, you're developing relationships, you're developing, your skills, because you're getting exposure to different directors and to different people, and your demos will progress as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. It's worth mentioning as well. Like, it's really good to immerse yourself in media so that you know what the current landscape is. Like, watch lots of TV ads, radio ads, etc., and try and come up with a new pigeonhole. Because often, like an agency, there's no point in you sounding exactly like a voice that's been on the books for 8 years. Like, you've got to find a new niche so that like people are like, oh, it's a bit different, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And it amazes me how many people will say, and almost proudly, oh no, I don't watch commercial TV.
Yeah.
Or I don't listen to radio. You know, I listen to Spotify, or I've got my playlist, or and you think, well, you are mad. You know, you to not watch free-to-air television and hear what ads are on, you know, are on the television, on the radio. So that you can understand what the trends are at the moment, because they're always changing. And you'll hear, you know, every now and then you just hear something that's new and unique and it stands out and sounds amazing. And then to be able to have that as kind of reference material in your brain when you're at a session, to be able to go, actually, and you're not going to do your impression of that, but you're going to sort of, you can borrow, you know, where they put that pause, or where they put that inflection was really interesting. I might try that on my next, you know.
Absolutely.
So I mean, you know, I think absolutely, you know, listen, you know, to as much as you can that's in the marketplace, you know, now.
Yeah, and let it inform your performances. I think is like, you know, let it rub off on it in certain reads. Like I actually the last interview I did with Derek Perkins, the audiobook narrator, he's read a series of books which profoundly just influenced the way I do like non-fiction kind of you know, content scripts, because just his way of phrasing things was so clear. And, you know, it's good to borrow those things and just hear how people are doing it and let it to affect your own performance, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of VO trends, what are some VO trends in the Australian market? Is it the same as everywhere else, where it's just like, let's just bring it down, you're just talking to another person?
Yeah, I mean, I suspect you've had this direction as well over in New Zealand. I want it just like you're talking to your mate in the pub.
Yep.
That's still, I mean, that's been around for a while. People want, it used to be the talking at you, and I guess narrations, you know, if you think back to narrations from, you know, even only 10 years ago, but certainly 15, 20 years ago, it was that very authoritative sort of, here we are, we're BHP and we're doing things this way. And that's completely shifted to, rather than talking at people, you're talking to them. And and you want to be relatable. So, and it's like, you know, you're at BHP, this is what we do. And,
exactly. You're kind of like sharing an idea. It's kind of like that whole, imagine a place at the end of the universe. You know,
that's right, and it's so, and a lot of people will say, you know, I want something natural, I want it conversational, I want it casual. So that's definitely a trend at the moment. I think, you know, and it's some great advice, I think, that a lot of voices have been given over the years. But I think it's, you know, whenever you're reading a script, you know, you've got to imagine that you're actually, you know, you're talking to one person. You know, there's a person on the other end of that, you know, that speaker, and they're listening to your message. And I think that's, you know, rather than just sort of reading words on a page and, you know, making some sort of announcement, it's actually trying to have a conversation with someone, or trying to be relatable. And I think that's a trend that will probably, hopefully, never go away, because it's a great way of communicating.
So there's no place left for my radio voice.
And that's certainly something that, you know, whenever we get a lot of people, you know, making inquiries for representation here, and they'll always, well, not always, but quite often they're putting on their best radio voice, and the conversation usually goes along the lines of, I've been told that I've got a great voice, and I thought it was time that I finally did something about it.
The
And
classic.
so, well,
Absolutely.
you can start by dropping the silly voice.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And realize it's like 5% of it is having a good voice, and the rest is just script interpretation and
Yeah.
knowledge. And
Well, I mean, most of the top voices here, you could talk to them for an hour and you wouldn't even know that they're a voiceover. You know, they just sound like regular guys.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. A lot of people, when I put on my radio voice, or my voiceover voice, it comes from a completely different place. A lot like like a 100-meter sprinter. Usain Bolt doesn't walk a different way because he can run really fast.
Yeah, right.
It's a whole different muscle set that gets used.
Yeah.
I wanted to point out as well for aspiring voiceovers who are looking for representation. There's a great guide on your site in the FAQ section. I think it's really well written in terms of like managing people's expectations, because it is one of those industries where there's not a ton of work to go around. I think it's increasing. I think there is more work, but that it is one of those things that a lot of people want to do as well. So the cream really does rise to the top, and it is about tenacity and what do you say the other things? I basically put it down to having a certain natural talent, a passion for it, and then perseverance. Would you say there's anything else?
Look, absolutely. You sort of touched on it before. I think there's a lot of work out there, but there's a hell of a lot of people that want to do it. I was talking to one legendary sound engineer down in Melbourne, and he was explaining. He gave a lovely analogy. So it used to be this lovely little garden that we had in the voiceover, in the industry of voiceovers. And he said, and now it's an absolute jungle. So and therein does create opportunities, so one of the things that we've noticed, yes, there's all these, websites that, there's thousands of voices on offer to anyone. And there's so many more people doing voiceovers in Australia now than there were, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But it almost creates, it's too big for a lot of clients to even contemplate. So they know that they can come to RMK, or they can, go to an agency and they can cut through the clutter. So, and I guess that's certainly something that why people do benefit from having agency representation. And I guess that's the tough thing for anyone starting out is, to be able to sort of get noticed in what is quite a crowded marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So agents really do offer that sort of, dependability and making it really simple, which more and more clients want. But
and it's a high hit rate. I mean, if you get a voice from an agency, they're going to they will deliver. Very seldom is it not exactly what the client wants, and if it is, then they'll just choose another voice. But usually by the stage that it gets to that point, there's been a discussion with us. We diagnose what they want, what they're looking for, and going through the brief, we'll offer a range of suggestions of people that we think fit that brief. They then have a listen to them, and they'll go, yeah, I think this one or these two people, let's give them a go. And it might be 2 or 3 people that all go for the same ad, and then from that they'll find the perfect voice.
Yeah, right. So just sort of to wrap things up, because I know we've taken an hour of your time, and thank you so much for lending us your time and your ideas. What do you see as the kind of the future for voiceover in Australia? Like I sense that there is a small groundswell of home-based studios going for that non-union work, potentially like working on those offshore platforms, and perhaps calling their local video production companies. Is there room, do you think, in the market? Do you think that's sort of how it's going to move forward? Is that these sort of two parallel industries?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, you look at the sort of the States, and quite often, what happens in America sort of happens here, down the track. And you do end up with, I mean, we almost kind of have that already. You've got your, in America, it's a union and non-union sort of work. You could make that distinction. And here you'd probably say it's, there's the professional sort of top end of the marketplace, and then there's, the lower end of the marketplace, and that's generally the voices that will be listed on those directory sites. And it's a look. There'll always be a market for the cheaper voices, and there's a lot of clients that simply can't afford to be paying agency rates or union rates for work, or they maybe don't see the value in paying that. So there will always be a market in that sort of lower end. But I think, but there's also, the bulk of our clients sort of don't mind paying reasonable rates, and understand that, okay, that might be $1,000 for 30 minutes of your time, but you're not just paying for the 30 minutes in the studio. You're paying for all that time of building up your experience and building up your skill set, being able to shave, a quarter of a second off a 30-second script, or actually, you've got something that's wall-to-wall copy, and it's running 15 seconds over, but you've got to actually make it sound slower. All those tips and tricks that you learn along the way. That's what they're paying for. And the other thing that they're paying for is the ability to get that voice in a studio, tomorrow at 10 o'clock or this afternoon at 1 o'clock. A lot of our work is sort of, booked on the same day.
Yeah, right.
And so to have voices available, at a moment's notice, means that you need to pay reasonable fees so that people don't have to go and do a second, another job. Because if they're not, if you don't have available full-time freelance voices, then you kind of got to, book things around whatever the other job might be. So that's something when you talk about the distinction between union, non-union, or agency represented voices and non-agency represented voices, or the top end of the marketplace and the bottom, it's very difficult to come out of that bottom area of the marketplace. If you've been giving your product away cheaply, it's very hard to then start charging reasonable fees. So even when you're starting out, even when you're new to the industry, you can do demos, you can do, offer your services for look at doing deals where, okay, look, give me a shot. Let me have a go. But then say, and I'll only charge you if you use it. I think you can do stuff for free, or you can do stuff, without having a set rate for it. But don't give it away, and understand what your value is.
And if you give something for free, then it inherently has no value, right?
Well, that's right. Yeah, and once you start doing that, and our industry, and I'm sure yours is the same, is littered with people who were great voices. They used to be at the top end of town, and then they started doing cheap deals, and then they started giving it away, or started doing and then what happens is you end up doing work for if they don't want to spend money on a voice, they probably don't want to spend money on production. They probably don't want to spend money on quality. And so the whole, you start being the voice of these ads that look and sound terrible. And then that damages your brand. Oh no, I heard them doing something recently. And before you know it, and like I said, there's quite a few examples in this industry of people that used to be top voices that now you just hear them on some terrible ad and they're doing nothing. And it's quite sad, all because they've sort of, at some point, they've made a decision to chase these jobs and do deals and sort of price themselves, down in order to get the work, and it's kind of ruined their career.
Yeah, that's a very good point actually about the quality of the work that you then are hired upon. That it does slowly go down. I mean, I like to think that I know that I used to be in that kind of bottom tier, and I have I have, every year I've put my prices up, and in my kind of 10-year career so far as being a voice artist, I did start right at the bottom, and now I'm doing SAG gigs and stuff of equal value. But I feel like the missing component and the reason people stay in that is not because of their voice training ability and their craft sort of work that they do. It's in the marketing and business side of their voiceover business.
Sure.
So like they don't know that you should never discount, always add value. So like charge what you want and then make it worth their while with other stuff you put on, rather than being a race to the bottom.
The value added.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, simple things like that. But and that's something else that I feel like there's huge scope in the industry for is that kind of business training around non-agency representatives.
Yeah, and I think and a lot of people don't. And look, maybe that's also good for us as an agency because we usually take care of most of the business side of the voiceover business for our artists. But even with an agent, you still have to treat it as a business. You are still a product. You're still providing a service. Things like when you do go into a studio, or even if you're on a Zoom, being presentable, looking good. Like some people turn up to professional studios, in tracky pants. You've got to understand, and like you said, the value added. I mean, punctuality, professionalism, and just simple. One of the simplest things. A little at the end of a job. Thank you. Thanks for the booking. It's huge. But it is a business, and it needs to be treated like that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else that you wanted to sort of add?
No. Look, it's been a nice chat. I don't really do many of the. Well, I don't do any of these things. So I talk to a lot of our artists. Obviously, that's a big part of my job. But it's it's obviously something that I'm very passionate about. Is this wonderful industry that's been good to me, and it's filled with wonderful people and a lot of great characters. So no, it's a great industry. It's it's a lot of hard work, but it's also a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well done. Thank you so much, Luke Downs from RMK.
No worries,
thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks for the chat.